This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Welcome to today's Talk Business and Politics Daily. I'm Roby Brock, joined by John Brummett of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Good to see you.
Good to be seen. Good to be here.
Medicaid work requirements. Been in the headlines this past week. You've been writing about it, number one, but number two, the deadline approached, as well as there was a ruling in Kentucky that may throw some question marks around the Arkansas Works work requirement there. Tell me what to explain to me your position on it at this point in time.
Well, I have a couple of positions, but the general position is that Medicaid is not suitable for welfare to work policy, which is what the state is trying to do here. I know Asa Hutchinson is advancing it, promising these very conservative Republican legislators that we're going to make these people work, is how he managed to pass Medicaid expansion and keep Arkansas Works alive. But Medicaid exists for people who are so poor they simply can't get health care. And to impose a work requirement means that you are saying that if you don't work, or in this case, click on a computer to say you're looking for work, then what's the penalty? You're not going to have health care. We give prisoners on death row health care.
There are a lot of exemptions, though, for people in this.
They do carve out a lot of exemptions, and they should. I mean, if you've got dependent children at home, if you're the sole provider, if you've got any sort of medical condition, this is for able-bodied people. But the ruling in Kentucky beat us in getting a waiver for Medicaid expansion. We were second. We're the first to implement it. The ruling there basically said Medicare is not the purpose of Medicaid. The purpose of Medicaid is to provide expand health care to those who need it. Inserting a work requirement into it defies the very purpose and concept of it because the penalty is overly harsh. The people who brought the case in Kentucky, they're now looking at Arkansas. I think they're going to come in here and make the same case. So that's my position. My other position is, as I said, when you look at this program, it's less a work requirement than a web proficiency requirement. There's the Human Services Department has put out a nice YouTube video. It's as well done as our weekly sessions here, at least. But basically, the spokesman for Human Services is saying, now, if you're out there and you're 30 to 49 and you're so poor you don't have a computer, please click here, then click here, then enroll here by filling in all this. And the deadline for the first phase was Thursday night, and at last I saw on Thursday afternoon, they had thousands who were not clicking. If they don't click in 3 months, presumably they lose Medicaid coverage. So we could be throwing thousands of people off who don't even know about this requirement or who lack the wherewithal to meet what is a web click requirement more than a work requirement. Because all you got to do is say, I'm looking for work, or I volunteered at my church.
And you may already be doing that.
You
may just not be able to do it technologically.
I think the lawsuit is coming, and as one Arkansan, I look forward to the lawsuit.
Well, let's say this. Let's say the lawsuit, and this is highly speculative here, let's say the lawsuit is successful. You know that is going to require Governor Hutchinson and the Republican majorities in the state legislature to look for another avenue to keep this Medicaid expansion conservative. What would they look to do beyond a work requirement? Do you have any suggestion or thought of, I mean, don't you think politically that's what they would have to do if it gets struck down?
To remind you, and I know you know this, there's another pending waiver request, which is to not cover up to 138% of poverty, but to cover only up to 100% of poverty, and throw those people in that extreme level of poverty, between 100 and 138% of poverty, it's still very poor, over into the standard health care exchanges. The federal government is worried if they give Arkansas this waiver, or all these other states are going to want to do the same thing, and then Medicaid, and then messes up the entire health care system. I don't know what else they would have to do. And I thought you were going to ask, as an advocate of Medicaid expansion, who admires that the governor found a way to do it, shouldn't I be rooting for this work requirement to sustain so that we can continue to get these conservative votes to keep it afloat. Because if we lose the work requirement and we lose some legislative votes, then getting that 3/4 majority, that is possible. But I am to the point where I'm tired of just saying, do whatever you can do to get these folks to vote for it.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of, it's time. It's
time to embrace it.
It's time to embrace it.
Not embrace it.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. And I'm taking that out of the equation, and I'm looking at the work requirement for what it is, and it is, I think it's a mean policy. I think. I don't think everybody who's for it is mean, but I think the policy itself is mean, and I think it also is fraught with legal peril. I think we're going to get a chance to find that out.
We will find out on that. Dr. Joe Thompson and I sat down late last week, and he actually, I want to credit him for bringing this to my attention here, because I think this gets to the philosophical debate about Medicaid expansion and health care coverage. A family of 4 in Arkansas qualifies for Medicaid expansion coverage if they make $36,000 a year. The median household income in Arkansas is $42,000 a year. That's not much of a gap.
No.
I mean, that's a closing gap right there. Something to kind of keep in mind.
What's
there.
the point, though?
Well, we're going to have a philosophical discussion at some point in time of how poor do you have to be?
Your point is
to qualify for Medicaid expansion when the average or the median household income is pretty close to the number for what qualifies now for Medicaid expansion for Arkansas Works.
We are an overwhelmingly poor state still. I mean, we got some rich people and we're getting jobs, and maybe the future is brighter for Arkansas. But we remain a poor state, and you get outside of Northwest Arkansas and Central Arkansas and Jonesboro, that percentage, that median income, is within the Medicaid expansion population, I'm sure. And the question is, what do you do?
Yeah.
And do you tell them, unless you get to a computer, we're going to take away your health care? That's not something I personally am willing to do.
There's a couple of things that are going to be on the ballot this November, or potentially on the ballot. I want to start with the potentials first. We saw signatures turned in late last week for 3 different proposals: casinos, minimum wage, and term limits. Let's go term limits. They turned in a lot of signatures, way more than they need. We've had convictions of elected officials. It's going to be pretty easy pickings for the term limits people to say, don't you want to curtail these people's activity right here? How overwhelmingly do you think term limits would pass if it qualifies, which it looks likely to do?
Fairly overwhelmingly. I forget when we passed the initial term limits, it was up there in the 2/3 for over 60, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. I would think so. Again, the surprise is that people in 2014, whether they knew they were doing it or not, extended term limits essentially, because an ethics amendment was amended by the legislature, by John Woods, an now infamous and convicted legislator, to say that it took the number of years you could serve if you got elected and fulfilled, got limited in the House and then got limited in the Senate, and said you could serve all of that any way you wanted.
Yeah.
Which would, and I don't think people, I just don't think people fully grasped what was happening, and they probably would not have done that had it stood alone. So the national term limits people, this limits it to 10 years, and I think, so I think that passes in any political environment in Arkansas. But right now, the political environment in Arkansas, I believe, and this is the only thing that might give somebody like French Hill trouble against a credible opponent in Clark Tucker, throw out the people who are in office, and because the succession of legislative corruption stories and convictions has soured people even to an unusual level. They were already soured to politics, but soured them even more. And that is a factor. You're getting ready to ask me about issue 1?
I am about to do that.
Okay, you go ahead and ask.
But you steal my segue if you want to. It's fine.
No.
So you've been tweeting and writing a lot about issue 1. You say it's the most important item on the ballot this next year. It is the one that changes the rules for the judiciary, lets the legislature control this. It puts caps on certain damages. It's the tort reform proposal. How do you see term limits possibly being impacting that vote?
Well, this way. I wrote a column about it. Thursday. Appeared Thursday, and I based it largely on visiting with former Supreme Court Justice Annabelle Tuck, who heads one of the committees that's opposing it. But her focus, and the focus of her group, is not the limits on what plaintiffs' lawyers can make in terms of contingency fees, and not on limits of damages. They're leaving that to other people to argue.
Both are two pretty powerful messages, though, that could duke it out.
Right, and she gets into those. She can't help it. But mainly her side is saying this section that says the legislature by 3/5 vote shall do the rulemaking of the courts. In addition to being a violation of the separation of powers doctrine, it changes this principle. Now, the rules of criminal and civil procedure, how we proceed in our lawsuits, and under the ground rules that are known to everybody, are set by professional committees working for the Supreme Court, made up of lawyers in all forms of legal practice, and are subjected to public hearing and public review, and then the Supreme Court adopts them or doesn't adopt them. This says the state legislature can inject itself into that process and say, no, we're going to try to vote by 60 out of 100 in the House and 21 out of 35 in the Senate to write the rules ourselves. And if you write the rules, as she says, you're the umpire of the baseball game. And if you're the legislature with fluid power to meet and make rules, then you could set the rules at home plate pregame meeting with the managers, then you could change them in the 6th inning if things weren't going the way you wanted. And she, conceivably, lobbyists for private interests who don't like outcomes at the court could use their influence, which we have seen at the state legislature, to get rules changed. And then you get into, she's wondering, how is this, are we going to have retroactive application? She said, this is a recipe for abuse and disaster. Now, I say all that to say, to your question, I got tons of reaction to this column. And a lot of it was trial lawyers who saying, way to go, and retweeting it. But there were a lot of conservative people saying, I'm conservative, I'm Republican. I don't want these corrupt, you-know-whats setting the rules of the court. And when you start hearing that kind of thing, you see a slight change in the political climate, and this abundance of corruption that we've seen, I think puts issue one more in play. I mean, the nursing homes, the medical industry, corporations, the state chamber, they're going to put millions upon millions into this. Trial lawyers and legal groups are going to put some millions, probably not as much. But I think the issue could come down to legislative corruption. It could be a factor. Your question?
Well, I was just going to say that may lead us to start seeing some messaging on this start sooner rather than later. There's a lot of money.
Well, that's one thing the judge said. Judge Tuck said.
I'm surprised we haven't already started seeing.
No, we're going to see it soon. And I think probably the pro side is looking now at the publicity and the reaction and conversations like this and saying we need to get started. Judge Tuck says the issue for the message for those advocating issue one will be jobs and your doctor. Protect your job and protect your doctor. If we limit this liability for our employers and your doctor, then you're protecting two things precious to everybody, their doctor and their job. But now I think probably more than don't limit the damages is don't let the legislature take over the courts. On the damage cap side, just to say this, fundamentalist Christian groups, right-to-life groups, oppose the idea that you cap the value of a human life at $500,000 unless there is actual economic earnings capacity shown, which caps the life of a child or a senior citizen. And so that complicates this too. And you'll notice the governor has not yet taken a position. Mm-hmm. So this one's going to be most interesting.
All of that complexity, all of those political dynamics are why we cover politics, and it makes it fun.
We got into the calculus last week of the Supreme Court pick, and this has some of that calculus too. Or it's like a chess game, like if I move here, what happens here? So yeah, you notice I get sort of wound up talking about this because of these competing factors.
Right, it's good stuff.
And it's very, very important.
Yeah. All right, he's John Brummett with the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. You can catch him 3 days a week in the newspaper, a fourth day online, and you can catch him through Facebook and on our YouTube channel and our homepage at talkbusiness.net every day.
And Twitter's where the fun is. Don't forget Twitter.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you, my man.
That's all for today's program. I'm Roby Brock. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Arkansas Electric Cooperative Corporation provides electric energy across 2/3 of Arkansas. This is an exciting time in our energy history, with incredible progress being made in renewable energy and storage technologies. As our energy portfolio continues to diversify, we'll maintain an all-the-above strategy to provide reliable and affordable electricity. Ever since the first light bulbs were placed in our members' homes, the electric cooperatives have been the solutions provider for our members, and we want to continue that well into the future.
Each day, the promise of our nation begins again. Arkansas and America, moving forward. I help make that promise a reality. It's not for everyone, but people everywhere depend on us.
Oh, I love you too, sweetie.
Trucking delivers, or everything stops. And that's what drives me.